Welcome and Baruch Adonai melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And let's go into the share. Hopefully you can see what's going on here. Okay. So the last time we left this off, we hadn't quite finished doing the Torah Temimah on the section that we had. And essentially what it was about was the issue of whether women are obligated to be fruitful and multiply, or whether just the men are obligated to be fruitful and multiply. And the pragmatic element of this is that if a woman isn't obligated to do it, then if she doesn't choose to become married, or let's say that she and her husband decide they don't want to have children, well, the husband's got an obligation, and so he is going to have, unless of course there are circumstances that would prevent it under normal circumstance. So I can give you an example of where he would not. There's a discussion elsewhere, we didn't do it this time, is at what point have you fulfilled that commandment? And there's a discussion between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai about this. I think Beit Shammai says that you have to have two boys. Beit Hillel says that you need to have a boy and a girl, something like that, that once you have a boy and a girl, you've fulfilled it. Whether you fulfilled it if you've had two girls, I'm just speaking traditionally in terms of the halakha itself. I'm not certain as to that, but at any rate, I think that Beit Hillel has a more liberal position about it, but it's essentially two children is fulfilling the mitzvah. So let's suppose a man marries, a man has had children from a previous marriage and has fulfilled that mitzvah and marries another woman, and she doesn't have children and she would not like to have children. She is free to do that. She is not obligated. When we got into the discussion here, there was quite a bit of give and take here in terms of whether or not a woman is obligated. And the most that Torah Temimah could come up with is a statement made in certain other halachic decisors, poskim, that a woman was obligated in the sense that there's a verse in Isaiah that says that God created the world in order to be populated. But at the same time, that's not seen as a mitzvah per se, but more to say it's advice, and that a woman is not obligated, does not come under an obligation in that particular case. And then he goes into the idea of whether or not one sells a Sefer Torah. There is a mitzvah that in order to make it possible, let's say for a poor man, in order to have a wife, a young man who's poor and can't afford a woman's dowry, his wife's dowry, that one can sell a Sefer Torah for the sake of providing funds for this young man in order to get married. And the question is, well, would one do that for a woman, right? That becomes now a question, right? And that's kind of where we left it, but we hadn't finished. So he says, according to what they have figured out, when you look at all the details that go in and out, right? Ein mochrim Sefer Torah, that one does not sell a Sefer Torah, rak bishvil nisuei yitumim zecharim, only for the sake of the marriage of orphans who are male. He hasn't finished, however. Ach, im koze, he goes on to say, but regardless, having said all of this, yesh lekayem chidusham shel hamagen Avraham l'chor. These are commentators on the Shulchan Aruch who say that one is still obligated to sell a Sefer Torah for an orphan girl, right? And they say because of this mitzvah of Lashevet Yetzara, that God formed the world in order to be populated. And he disagrees. He says one still needs to, fulfill these laws that are mentioned by the Magen Avraham and the Bechor Shor, af kilo mitamam, despite the fact that they're reasoning not for the reasoning they provide. Vahu al pi ma shekatuv b'gitin, but rather seeking a different source from a different point of view, which is written in the tractate Gitin, Lamed Tet, page 39, on the A side of the page. Why would one still do this? De mishum chashash hefker, because of a concern that the woman might engage in sexual relations and possibly lead towards prostitution. Heitiru l'shachrer shivcha, there they permitted one, this is a very different thing, to free a maidservant, right? And this is in the case of a Canaanite maidservant where the Torah says that one is not obligated to do that. But in fact, the law is that one can and one should. Afki ovrim bazeh al aseh, okay, even though one is violating a positive commandment in the Torah, le'olam bahem ta'avodu, that you should hold them subservient to you, serve you forever. Uyan sham. Look at that verse there. I'm not certain, but I think it is in Deuteronomy. He doesn't give you the reference here. But he says, regardless, one needs to do it for this concern of hefkerut. V'chein b'yitoma aniyah. And so the same applies for a woman, an orphan who is poor. Yesh lachush lazeh. One has the same reason to be concerned about this. Mikevan, for the reason, she'ein mi she'id ogla, because there is no one to be concerned about her situation and her morals, right? Ulahashkiach al tom darka, and to supervise, to make sure that she acts in a tom, really means a pure kind of way. Mochrin gam sefer Torah. In that case, one should also sell a sefer Torah kedei lahasiyah, so that she can get married. So it's just, again, we had in this particular Torah Temimah some very interesting discussion and give and take regarding a point of halakha, and this is his conclusion at this point, that one may not be doing it for the original regarding the original halakha as it's stated, but there are other concerns and other situations that impinge on the application of the law, even to a point of overturning a positive commandment in the Torah. Very interesting. So let's go on. Just going on to the next verse. Okay, and so he says, Vayomer Elohim, God said, Hine natati lachem, behold, I give to you et kol esev, all herbs, grasses, zoreya, zera, in other words, vegetation, I would say, that is able to produce seed-producing vegetation, asher al pnei kol haaretz, which is over the surface of the entire earth, ve'et kol ha'etz asher bo pri etz zoreya zara, and likewise all trees in which there is fruit that has the seed in it. Lachem yeh lochlam, you should have it for food. So, in other words, so that you can survive, right? Eating is a huge enterprise on the part of human beings, and of course, any animal life. Ulachol chayat haaretz, and to all the beasts of the earth, ulachol ofa shamayim, and all the birds of the air, ulachol romes al haaretz, and all that which swarms over the earth, asher bo nefesh chaya, which has within it the soul of life, the breath of life. And I think, nefesh, yeah, it's related to breathing, but is a living, there are living things. It kol yerik esad le'ochla, all vegetation for food, and so it was. So we see that initially, and we're going to comment on this further, that originally Adam and all the animals were vegetarian. So we're going to look at that. Lachem yeh lochla, to you it shall be for food. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Said Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, Adam Harishon, the first man, Adam, lo hutar lo basar la'achila. He was not given permission to eat meat. Shne'emar lachem yeh laכלה, because it says, this shall be for you to eat, ulechol chayat haaretz, and to all the beasts of the earth, velo chayat haaretz lachem, and it doesn't say, and all the beasts of the earth for you to eat. So originally, for afalpi, and despite the fact, dichtiv, that it says in Perek Pasuk Kachet, even though it says in verse 28, Urdu and rule over Dagat Hayam, the fish over the sea, over Of Hashamayim, and on the birds of the winged fowl, right, the fowl of the heavens, Uvachol Chaya HaOrmeset, and all the animals which swarm, etc. Hanehu LaMelacha. They could only use them when it says, you shall rule over them. It only meant for the sake of work. It didn't mean they could eat them. So there was a relationship to animals, but still one of vegetarians and not that of being able to be carnivorous and to eat these animals in that regard. And so we're going to take a look at this. Right? There's certainly some questions that would come up from this, but it is an interesting point to know that when human beings were originally created, they were created as vegetarians, and all of life was strictly vegetarian. Umatzinu, right? And we find sheshayach melicha b'dagim. So, of course, one of the first questions we could ask was, in what sense could they use fish for work, right? For some kind of work, over ofot, and likewise with birds. Kemosha Katuv Baba Kama Tunhei Aleph. We have a reference to this in Baba Kama in the Talmud, page 55a. Hinhig be'iza uveshvuta. That in fact they were able to drive the Iza, the sea goat. It's a kind. We don't exactly know what animal this was, but it was it's called an Iza, and according to Jastrow, it's a fabulous, animal, uveshvuta, and he translates a shvuta as a mullet. So again, even it says that there, but Torah Temimah is going to be a little bit more helpful than that. Upiresh Rashi, and there in the Talmud, Rashi explains, Kashar Karon Ladag Shebayam, he was able to hitch a wagon to a fish in the sea, Ulaez Bayabasha, and a goat on the dry land, Al Sfat Hayam, on the shore of the sea. Ushnehem Manigim Oto. So, and he would be able to steer both of them. So, again, this is just an explanation of how they were used for service. I'm not saying you have to believe this. I'm just saying this is how, at least conceptually, they could be used for service. And this is a little bit easier to believe, that they used goose, the tarnagolim, and roosters for threshing. And again, this is in Baba Metzia Tzadik Aleph, and this is Baba Metzia, page 91b. And likewise other animals. And in fact, the serpent itself is mentioned. That Adam was able to use them at the time of creation. So again, the time of creation in many ways is mythical time. It certainly, I think, stands unique, and we could take this for whatever it's worth. The da, and you should know, the alpi drasha zu, that based on this particular interpretation, that is to say, that human beings in the original manifestation were vegetarians, Yesh lahasbir ma shematzinu b'midrashim. One can understand better what we find in midrashim. De mispar hasheva hamitzvot shenitzvutavu b'nei Noach. That with regard to the 7 mitzvahs with which Noah, the children of Noah, were commanded. We know about the commandments of the sons of Noah. The point about this is that they apply to all human beings and not just the Jewish people. Chasra mitzvat Ever min hachai. One of those mitzvot, one of those commandments is called Ever min hachai, and it has to do with the fact that in days before refrigeration, and as I understand, there are actually there's a tribe today that does this. You weren't allowed to take a limb from a living animal to consume it. In other words, sometimes they would take a non-essential limb, they would amputate a limb from an animal to have fresh meat, and that is something that is forbidden to humanity. L'Adam Harishon. But this is missing, right? This particular commandment is missing for the first human being. Lo kesugyat haGemara. He makes a point, though, that in the Gemara itself, in Sanhedrin, in Tractate Sanhedrin, page 56b, it apparently does mention it there, but it's not mentioned in other parallel texts in Midrashim. In other words, in Sanhedrin, it does mention Ever min hachai, but in parallel Midrashim, it does not. It does not mention them. V'ha Rambam, and likewise, Maimonides, Beresh Perek Tet, at the beginning of chapter 9, Mi Melachim, from, it's called a section of his halachic work, his great halachic work, called Melachim, means rulers, kings, etc. Tafas Ikar Hamidrash Yen Sham, right? So, well, maybe he's saying, okay, unlike it, that the Rambam, in fact, does hold on to this this midrash, and he says Yen Sham, and it says Bekama Makomot. I think this is what that means. This abbreviation in several places. Okay, so there's a comma here, and he's saying, interestingly enough, Maimonides does not include Ever min hachai. I would have to actually check to see for sure. But that does seem to be what he's saying here, that Maimonides understands and doesn't include it. V'daver ze tzarich tam, and why, right? This needs some explanation. Ulefi drasha zo. However, according to what we've just explained, yitba'er hetev, it becomes well, you can understand it very well. Because since Adam was forbidden in any case from eating any kind of meat, bichlal, at all, mimela, automatically, lo shayach bo tzivui al isur ever min hachai. It wouldn't make any sense to command him not to eat ever min hachai. He's not allowed to eat any kind of meat, not just a situation of Ever min hachai. That's why it's left out when it comes to Adam. Aval kisheba Noach, but once Noah came, right? Once we read about Noah, v'hutalo basar, and he was given permission. Human beings were given permission at this point to eat meat. Nitztave az al Ever min hachai. Then it made sense to forbid him from eating Ever min hachai, right? A limb from a living animal. V'hinei Da'at Manda Amar, and as far as the position, right, the opinion of the one who says Ze de Isur Achilat Basar Nimshach Ad Hazman Shiatza Noach Min Adheva, there's an opinion that says it wasn't just Adam who was forbidden meat, but that the prohibition against eating meat, in fact, went on until the time when Noah emerged from the ark. That was the first time. Umasmich zeh, and there's support from this. He supports it, diftiv, because it says in the Bible, Sham, there, keyerik esev natati lachem et kol, like the vegetation of like the green grasses, literally, like vegetation, natati lachem et kol, I have given you everything. Ichlalo gam basar, that included in this universal able to eat anything, right? That included in that was, in fact, meat. However, there is no explanation at all. Tam isur achilat basar la'adam harishon. But we're not given an explanation as to why Adam should have been forbidden to eat meat in the first place. Umatzati b'madrash Agadah. He says, I found in a midrash Agadah al HaTorah, on the Torah, and this was printed nitpas mikitvei yad b'Vien. This was printed from manuscripts in Vienna, Tarnad. I believe that would work out to being 1894. And this is what it says in this midrash. Utra basar lanoach. Noah was given permission to eat meat, lefi sheikriv kodam, because he offered up a sacrifice. I have a question on this personally, because we know, for example, that Abel also offered up a sacrifice, as far as we can make out. So why weren't men given an opportunity to eat meat after Abel? However, we'll let it stand for now, simply as a question. Ve'od shakol lemita omdim, and because everything at that point was in fact mortal, right? So Adam, of course, we know originally was created immortal, and by the time Noah came around, everyone we know was mortal. But again, the same could apply to Abel. Aval la'adam lo hutar, but to Adam he was not given permission. Lefi she'akol l'chayim amdu. Why? Because at the time everything was immortal. Ad shechata, until he sinned. V'nigzera gzera al kol bria lamut, and at that time, of course, the edict was that everything should become mortal. Ad kan l'shono. That's the end of the quote from this Midrash Agadah. Ha'inyan mevu'ar, and Torah Temimah says, and this clarifies everything. So,
This Adam
yeah.
was Adam's sin.
Right, correct. Yes, when he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right. At that time, the human beings became mortal. So, interestingly enough, this doesn't take into account my concern about Abel. Okay, and I think the difference is that the point he is not mentioning is because Noah saved the animals from death at the flood, he was given this permission over being able to consume the animals, because had Noah not done what he did, they would have died anyway. And that there's that sense of that's the reason why at this particular point human beings were given that permission. Obviously, Noah's descendants, humanity were essentially Noah's descendants, and that's why they were given permission, and why, even though it may have to do with him bringing a sacrifice, nevertheless, Abel was not in the same position. There's a distinction there. We actually discussed this quite a bit when we discussed Parshat Noach with our Rashi discussion there. So let's see how we are doing. Okay, so I think we should stop here, and we'll continue next time here, next God willing, when we discuss Torah Temimah. We'll do it at that point. Let me stop the share. And if any of you have any questions, please feel free before I stop the recording. Any questions or comments? Okay, all right.